Across the history of the African savanna and the great zoos of the world, few animals have captured human imagination like the lion. Known as the king of beasts, it has always symbolized strength, dominance, and majesty. But throughout the last century, there were reports of lions so immense that they seemed to defy the very limits of nature itself. What if a lion could grow larger than a Siberian tiger, the species considered the biggest cat on Earth? What if a male reached 3 meters in length and tipped the scale at more than 350 kilograms of raw power? These questions have intrigued scientists, guides, and wildlife enthusiasts for decades. These are not tribal myths or exaggerated hunters' tales. They are real animals, documented, measured, and remembered. Lions that lived in different corners of the world and left their mark, not only for their colossal size, but also for the cultural impact and the stories that surrounded them. Among them, one name echoes louder than any other: Simba. In Swahili, Simba simply means lion, but across continents, it became the banner of different colossi. Each had a different story, but all carried the same aura of awe. Before we dive into their individual sagas, it is important to understand that these animals were more than just numbers of weight and length. They were living witnesses of how nature, when placed before human eyes, can become legend. What you're about to hear are real stories of lions that challenged the impossible across decades, zoos, and continents. And let me ask you, where are you watching this video from? Drop it in the comments. It's always amazing to see how far the roars of these titans can reach. In the mid-20th century, long before wildlife documentaries brought the savannah into living rooms, people in Europe encountered lions not in their natural habitat, but behind the iron bars of zoos. Among these lions, one name became legendary in Ireland: Simba. Housed at the Dublin Zoo, this male lion stunned visitors not only with his commanding presence, but with a size that pushed the boundaries of what many thought possible for his species. Simba of Dublin measured an extraordinary 3 meters in length and weighed an estimated 350 kilograms, far beyond the typical size of wild African males, who average around 190 kilograms. Standing before him was like staring at a living contradiction, a predator that seemed to rival even the Siberian tiger in sheer mass. His deep chest, powerful shoulders, and thick mane gave him a silhouette that looked more myth than reality. Visitors described feeling small and vulnerable under his gaze, as though the iron bars were not enough to separate man from beast. At that time, European zoos operated under a different philosophy. The animals were symbols of power, cultural curiosity, and spectacle, brought from faraway lands to draw crowds. For Dubliners of that era, Simba was more than a zoo exhibit. He was a city icon. Newspapers reported his measurements, children begged parents to see him, and international whispers about the Irish giant lion spread far beyond the walls of Phoenix Park. But Simba's story also raises questions that echo into today. Why was such an enormous lion confined thousands of miles from his native savanna? His size was likely a product of selective breeding, captive diet, and conditions that emphasized growth over survival fitness. In the wild, a lion that heavy might have struggled to hunt efficiently. But in captivity, food arrived regularly, allowing his body to expand beyond nature's usual design. For visitors, the spectacle was unforgettable. Imagine a family in 1950s Dublin walking into the zoo and suddenly standing before a predator as tall as a man when reared on hind legs, jaws large enough to crush bone with ease. Children pressed against the railings, awestruck by the living giant. Tourists who had seen lions on safari admitted they had never encountered anything close to Simba's proportions. His presence reshaped the public image of what a lion could be. Yet behind the fascination was a hidden tension. These great beasts were admired, but also trapped, their majesty confined to concrete floors and steel cages. Unlike the endless plains of Africa, Simba's kingdom was measured in square meters, not kilometers. He roared into echoing walls, not open skies. His colossal frame, while astonishing, symbolized not only power, but also the compromises forced upon wildlife when taken from the wild. Ethical questions began to surface, especially among conservationists who saw animals like Simba as proof of human exploitation rather than triumph. Was this magnificence worth celebrating, or did it highlight how far humans were willing to go to create spectacles at the expense of nature's balance? In many ways, Simba's fame foreshadowed the debates that would dominate conservation in the decades to come. Nevertheless, Dublin's Simba remains an unforgettable chapter in the history of captive lions. His memory is preserved in photographs, articles, and the testimonies of those who stood before him. Even now, when people recall stories of giant lions, his name emerges among the first. He was a paradox, a marvel of nature's adaptability and a mirror reflecting humanity's complicated relationship with the wild. Simba of Dublin embodied the duality of awe and reflection. To some, he was a symbol of strength unmatched by any predator. To others, he was a reminder that true greatness belongs not in cages, but in the wild landscapes where such creatures evolved to reign. And as his colossal figure fades into history, his story sets the stage for other titans who would follow, lions just as massive, each carrying their own legend. The rise of colossal lions like Simba of Dublin cannot be separated from the broader history of how humans treated wild animals throughout the 20th century. From the late 1800s into the mid-1900s, the capture and exhibition of exotic creatures became a booming industry. Zoos competed to display the largest, most unusual specimens, and lions, already powerful symbols of majesty and courage, were prime attractions. Their size, their roars, their manes became selling points for institutions eager to draw record-breaking crowds. At the heart of this era was a philosophy very different from the conservation ethos of today. Wild animals were not primarily valued as individuals in need of protection, but as trophies of empire, proof of human control over distant and dangerous lands. To display a massive lion was to signal prestige, wealth, and global reach. In Europe especially, colonial ties provided zoos with steady access to Africa's wildlife. From railway shipments to cargo ships, lions were transported across oceans to stand as living monuments of power. In this pursuit of spectacle, selective breeding and captive conditions produced anomalies that would never have survived in the wild. Overfed and protected, lions in zoos grew heavier than their savanna cousins. Some individuals were intentionally paired to maximize bulk and appearance, much as dog breeds had been shaped for centuries. The result was a generation of lions that, while extraordinary in size, were disconnected from the evolutionary realities of their species. Simba of Dublin was a perfect example of this phenomenon. His gigantic frame symbolized the triumph of human control, yet it also revealed how far zoos had strayed from any notion of preserving natural behavior. A lion in the wild must remain lean enough to hunt, swift enough to chase, and strong enough to defend territory. In captivity, those pressures disappeared, replaced by diets designed to impress spectators rather than sustain natural balance. The public, however, rarely questioned these dynamics. For most visitors, the chance to stand mere feet from a roaring giant was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Newspapers celebrated mega-lions as marvels, not as victims of confinement. The awe they inspired served as both entertainment and cultural validation, a way for cities to prove their sophistication by showcasing the wonders of the natural world, even if those wonders were stripped from their native lands. Only later, as the conservation movement gained strength in the 1960s and 1970s, did critics begin to reframe these spectacles. What had once been seen as triumphs of zoology began to appear as symbols of exploitation. Activists argued that the true majesty of lions could never be captured within bars. A lion's greatness lay not in its size, but in its freedom, in the echo of its roar across valleys, in the dust kicked up during a chase, in the sight of a mane silhouetted against an African sunset. Simba's story thus became a lens through which to examine humanity's shifting conscience. He was both admired and pitied, celebrated and questioned. His existence reminded people of what could be achieved under human management, but also of what was lost in the process. The paradox of the Dublin giant remains an enduring symbol of this historical transition. By reflecting on lions like Simba, we confront the legacy of zoos as much as we marvel at the animals themselves. They force us to ask uncomfortable questions. Were these giants true representatives of their species, or human-made curiosities? Did their size enhance the lion's legacy, or did it distort it? And what responsibility do we have today to ensure that future generations encounter lions not as curiosities of captivity, but as living rulers of their natural domains? In this way, the historical context surrounding Simba adds a deeper dimension to his legend. He was not only an animal of immense proportions, but also a marker of an era, a time when humanity's fascination with dominance overshadowed its duty to protect. To tell his story is to recognize both the marvel and the mistake, and to prepare for the next chapters where other lions would carry the same burden of awe and captivity. In the quiet county of Essex, England, another giant lion left his mark on history. Known as the Simba of Colchester Zoo, this male embodied the same paradox as his Dublin namesake, a creature both celebrated for his colossal size and pitied for the narrowness of his existence. By the 1970s, Colchester Zoo had grown into one of the most visited animal attractions in Britain, and Simba was its undisputed star. His sheer scale transformed him into a living legend for all who walked through the gates. Simba of Colchester was often described as weighing more than 300 kilograms and stretching close to 3 meters in length. Accounts differ slightly, but every source agrees. He was far beyond the average lion. His mane spilled like a crown across his shoulders, thick and dark, accentuating the bulk of his muscular frame. Standing before him, visitors often compared his size to that of a small horse, a surreal image for those who had only ever seen lions in books or films. Like Dublin's Simba, his size was the product of captivity. Well-fed and genetically predisposed toward bulk, he thrived in an environment where survival no longer depended on speed or agility. His meals arrived regularly, his only competition the confines of steel fencing. While wild lions burned energy defending territories, hunting buffalo, or clashing with rival males, Colchester's Simba invested his strength in growth alone. For the zoo, his presence was invaluable. Posters, advertisements, and guided tours all revolved around him. Families came specifically to witness the giant lion of Colchester. Children spoke of him at school, and international visitors made detours to see the enormous cat whose fame spread across Britain. His reputation turned the zoo into more than just a local attraction. It became a site of pilgrimage for those who wanted to glimpse nature at its most exaggerated scale. But with fame came scrutiny. By the late 20th century, public attitudes towards zoos were changing. The debate about animal welfare intensified, and lions like Simba became lightning rods for criticism. Was his size truly natural, or was it the result of unnatural conditions? Was the awe he inspired worth the price of his freedom? These questions, once whispered, began to surface more openly in newspapers, conservation circles, and even among ordinary visitors. Simba's daily life revealed the contradictions of captivity. He paced the edges of his enclosure, a restless pattern familiar to anyone who had observed animals in cages for too long. His immense body, while impressive, lacked the lean muscle of wild lions honed by hunting and combat. For all his might, he was a king without a kingdom, his roar echoing only against concrete and bars. Yet the public continued to adore him. For many, Simba was their first real encounter with a lion, a formative memory that would shape how they viewed wildlife forever. Teachers organized school trips to the zoo, where children pressed their noses against the glass, marveling at the sheer size of the creature on the other side. In that awe lay a seed of respect, one that would eventually fuel conservation awareness in future generations. Simba of Colchester thus became more than just an exhibit. He was a catalyst for conversation. His existence highlighted the contradictions of an era when zoos balanced spectacle with an emerging sense of responsibility. He symbolized both human curiosity and the costs of satisfying it. His story cannot be separated from the broader narrative of how societies began to reconsider the ethics of displaying wild animals. Today, his memory lingers as part of Colchester Zoo's legacy, a reminder of the giants once bred for size and fame. Simba of Colchester was both marvel and mirror, a reflection of humanity's endless fascination with lions and of its slow journey toward recognizing that true greatness belongs not behind bars, but on the open plains where such beasts were born to reign. In Eastern Europe, far from the African plains, another colossal lion carried the same fateful name. The Simba of Oradea Zoo in Romania rose to fame during the late 20th century as one of the largest lions ever kept in captivity. His story unfolded in a region still marked by political transitions and economic challenges, where zoos often served as symbols of prestige and resilience for local communities. For the people of Oradea, Simba was not only an attraction, he was a legend that drew visitors from across the country. Simba of Oradea was described as a towering presence, close to 3 meters in length and weighing well over 300 kilograms. His mane framed a head that seemed carved from stone, thick and commanding, while his massive paws pressed against the ground like anchors. Photographs and testimonies confirmed that he was among the heaviest lions ever kept in Europe. To stand before him was to question the very limits of the species, as though Oradea had become guardian to a beast sculpted by myth rather than biology. For the zoo, Simba was a treasure beyond measure. In a period when Romania faced isolation and limited resources, his presence elevated Oradea Zoo's reputation across Eastern Europe. Families traveled long distances to see him. Buses arrived on weekends, filled with tourists eager to gaze upon the giant lion of Romania. For children, it was an unforgettable encounter. For adults, it was a rare moment of wonder in a time when daily life was filled with hardship. Yet his immense size carried the same contradictions as other captive giants. Simba's body, sculpted by captivity, was not shaped for the savannah. He lived without the necessity of hunting, without rivals to fight, without miles to patrol. Instead, abundance defined his existence, meals delivered, shelter provided, growth unchecked. His size inspired awe, but it also revealed the unnatural conditions that enabled such gigantism. Visitors, however, rarely questioned these realities. For many, Simba represented a kind of national pride, proof that even in a small corner of Eastern Europe, Romania could claim a lion as large as any seen in Dublin or Colchester. His fame was woven into the cultural fabric of Oradea. Local newspapers wrote about him, guides spoke of him with reverence, and families kept photographs of their visits as if documenting an encounter with royalty. Behind the admiration, though, lay the same moral dilemmas beginning to surface elsewhere in Europe. Animal welfare movements were slowly reaching Romania, and voices began to ask whether keeping such a majestic creature confined to a limited space was justified. Simba's restless pacing and enormous bulk drew concern, even as they fueled fascination. He became both ambassador and prisoner, a lion whose existence mirrored humanity's conflicted relationship with nature. The paradox grew sharper as conservation debates expanded globally. In Africa, wild lion populations were shrinking due to habitat loss and conflict with humans, even as captive lions like Simba grew larger and more famous. To many, the irony was clear. While the giants in zoos captured attention, their wild cousins faced threats of extinction. Simba of Oradea thus symbolized both the triumph of human fascination and the tragedy of misplaced priorities. Still, his impact was undeniable. For thousands of Romanians, Simba was their first introduction to the idea of lions, shaping their understanding of the species for a lifetime. His sheer presence inspired respect, curiosity, and even love. In this sense, he played an unexpected role in building the foundation for conservation awareness, even if unintentionally. Simba of Oradea stands today in memory as a lion of contradictions, a giant born of captivity, admired for his magnificence but mourned for his confinement. He was proof of how far lions could grow under human conditions, and also a reminder that true majesty cannot be measured by size alone, but by freedom. His legend endures, part of a trilogy of giant Simbas that reshaped how the world viewed the king of beasts. In Northern Ireland, another giant carried the same fateful name. The Simba of Belfast Zoo became a figure of fascination during the latter decades of the 20th century, a time when the city was defined by conflict, but also by resilience. While political tensions and unrest dominated headlines, within the walls of Belfast Zoo, a different kind of legend was unfolding. Families arrived not just to escape the atmosphere of division, but to witness a lion that seemed larger than life itself. Simba of Belfast, much like his counterparts in Dublin, Colchester and Oradea, was remembered for his massive proportions. Accounts describe him as weighing well above 300 kilograms, stretching nearly 3 meters, and possessing a mane that seemed to envelop his entire body. His size alone transformed him into a spectacle, but in Belfast the impact was amplified by context. In a city where daily life was marked by uncertainty, Simba's colossal presence became a symbol of strength, endurance, and continuity. Visitors recalled the sensation of standing before him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Children clutched the railings as parents pointed out his vast frame, comparing him to the tigers kept nearby and noting that Simba appeared larger, broader, more commanding. His roar carried across the zoo, a sound that echoed like thunder, momentarily drowning out the hum of the city. For many, he was not just an animal. He was a reminder that there were still wonders in the world, still reasons to marvel. Behind the scenes, however, his life mirrored the contradictions of captivity. Well-fed and protected, Simba grew far beyond the size demanded by survival in the wild. His bulk, while astonishing to visitors, reflected the absence of the trials that shape wild lions. He did not chase buffalo across open plains or fight desperate battles against rival coalitions. Instead, he lived within the rhythms of human caretakers, his existence shaped by feeding schedules and the curious stares of crowds. For Belfast Zoo, Simba was invaluable. His fame brought visitors in record numbers, ensuring revenue and international recognition. During a period when tourism in Northern Ireland was often challenged by unrest, the zoo became a safe space where families could gather, and Simba was the centerpiece. His presence helped preserve the institution's reputation and financial stability, making him not just an animal, but an asset central to the city's cultural life. Yet, as with all the Simbas, admiration coexisted with ethical questions. Activists and animal welfare advocates pointed to his restless pacing, his confinement, and the unnatural conditions that allowed such gigantism. They asked whether pride in his size masked a deeper truth, that he was a king without a kingdom, a titan reduced to exhibition. His massive frame, they argued, represented both wonder and distortion, nature reshaped for human consumption. For the people of Belfast, however, Simba's memory remained more personal. Schoolchildren who saw him in the 1980s grew up remembering his roar, his mane, and the way he seemed to embody raw power. In conversations decades later, locals still spoke of him as one of the zoo's most iconic residents. His image lived on in photographs, postcards, and stories passed between generations, embedding him in the cultural memory of the city. Simba of Belfast thus joined the pantheon of colossal lions whose legends extended beyond their cages. He was part of a transitional era, a time when zoos were beginning to shift from places of spectacle to centers of education and conservation. His presence marked both the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, as society slowly redefined what it meant to admire and protect wild animals. Today, his story stands as a reminder of both marvel and responsibility. Simba of Belfast was a creature of contradictions, a giant admired for his size but confined by the walls around him, a source of pride and of debate. He symbolized the lingering tension between awe and ethics, a tension that would shape the future of human-animal relationships well into the 21st century. By the early 21st century, the legends of Dublin, Colchester, Oradea, and Belfast had fused into something greater than individual stories. Together, the Simbas became symbols of an era when human fascination with size and spectacle shaped the fate of lions far from their natural homelands. They were not just animals, they were cultural phenomena, each embodying the contradictions of captivity and the power of myth. Their legacy continues to echo in the way we think about lions today. For many who saw them in person, the memory of these giants became indelible. Children who once pressed their faces against glass enclosures grew into adults who carried stories of lions larger than life, retelling them to new generations. In this way, the Simbas shaped the imagination of millions. They were proof that nature could produce beings of almost impossible scale, even if those conditions were human-made. In their size lay both inspiration and unease, a reminder of how wonder and exploitation often walked hand in hand. Their fame also underscored the role of zoos in shaping cultural memory. In mid-century Europe, zoos were not merely educational centers but arenas of prestige, where the presence of an extraordinary lion elevated the institution's status. Dublin boasted of its mega lion as a symbol of Irish pride. Colchester advertised its giant as proof of British greatness. Oradea displayed Simba as national treasure, and Belfast found solace in its titan during troubled times. Each case demonstrated how animals could be used to project identity and resilience, but the Simbas also accelerated conversations about ethics. Their sheer abnormality forced people to ask whether what they admired was truly natural. Why did these lions grow so massive? Was their bulk a marvel of nature or a distortion of it? These questions, voiced first in whispers, grew louder as conservation and animal welfare movements expanded. The giants that once symbolized triumph came to represent the need for reform. In this sense, the Simbas became paradoxical pioneers of conservation. Though they were never wild kings of the savannah, their stories inspired awareness about the very species they represented. Visitors who once marveled at them grew into supporters of wildlife protection, donating to sanctuaries, joining campaigns, and demanding better standards for animals in captivity. The spectacle of the Simbas, ironically, laid the groundwork for a future in which spectacle would no longer suffice. Their legacy also shaped how future lions were presented. By the 1990s and 2000s, zoos across Europe began shifting away from breeding giants and instead focused on building enclosures that mimicked natural habitats. The emphasis turned to education and conservation, ensuring that lions were seen not as oversized curiosities, but as ambassadors of their wild cousins. The legend of the Simbas remained, but the philosophy that created them began to fade. Still, the aura of myth clung to their names. To this day, enthusiasts trade photographs of Dublin's colossal lion, recount stories of Colchester's titan, recall Oradea's national treasure, and speak of Belfast's icon. Online forums, documentaries, and wildlife histories all preserve their memory, proof that they were more than passing attractions. They had become part of the lore of lions, a strange parallel lineage alongside the famous wild coalitions of Africa. Yet the greatest part of their legacy lies in what they taught humanity about itself. The Simbas revealed our hunger for wonder, our power to shape nature, and our capacity for reflection. They showed that admiration without responsibility can lead to distortion, but that even from exploitation can emerge lessons that guide us toward respect and protection. In their massive frames, humanity saw both its ambition and its conscience. The legacy of the Simbas, then, is not just about lions of record-breaking size. It is about the evolution of human values. They remind us that every legend carries two sides, awe and cost. And as we look to the future of conservation, their stories compel us to seek balance, to ensure that lions inspire not because of what captivity can exaggerate, but because of what freedom allows them to be. The saga of the Simbas, Dublin, Colchester, Oradea, and Belfast, stands today as a tapestry woven with paradox. They were kings without kingdoms, titans who grew beyond natural limits, admired by millions yet confined by walls. Each represented a chapter in humanity's evolving relationship with lions, from spectacle and prestige to awareness and reform. In their shadows, we see not only the lions themselves, but the societies that shaped them. Their size remains astonishing even decades later. To imagine lions of 3 meters and more than 350 kilograms is to confront an image both mesmerizing and unsettling. These were not the lean, battle-scarred hunters of the Serengeti, nor the scarred coalitions of Kruger, but giants sculpted by captivity. And yet, the awe they inspired was real. They taught generations what it meant to stand in the presence of power, even when that power was muted by confinement. The Simbas also serve as mirrors of human ambition. We sought to create marvels, to own legends, to present to the world beasts that blurred the line between nature and myth. But in doing so, we revealed our contradictions. The more massive they grew, the more we were forced to confront the costs of cages, of altered genetics, of a life without freedom. Their greatness was undeniable, but it was also incomplete. Today, conservation takes a different path. Zoos increasingly strive to replicate the natural environments lions deserve, shifting away from giants bred for spectacle and toward ambassadors who inspire respect for wild populations. Across Africa, real lions fight real wars. Coalitions rise and fall, prides battle for survival, and droughts test the endurance of even the strongest males. These struggles unfold not in enclosures but on the open plains where roars echo for miles. The memory of the Simbas continues to matter precisely because it contrasts with these realities. By remembering them, we acknowledge both what humanity once demanded of lions and what we must now strive to protect. Their stories remind us that true majesty does not come from size alone, but from freedom, struggle, and survival in the wild. The Simbas endure as legends not just of captivity, but of transition. They mark the line between an era of exploitation and an era of conservation. They remind us that every roar silenced within bars should push us to protect the roars that still thunder across the savannas. In this way, their legacy is not finished. It lives on in every campaign, every reserve, and every battle to keep wild lions alive. Generations who once saw them as children now share their memories with grandchildren, not as stories of glory, but as lessons of change. They remind us of what lions once became under human hands, and of what lions must remain under the hand of nature. The Simbas may no longer pace behind fences, but their images walk with us into the future, guiding how we measure our respect for the wild. Thus, the legend closes where it began, with awe. The giants of Dublin, Colchester, Oradea and Belfast may never return, but their stories continue to echo like distant roars across time. They are myths of size, mirrors of society, and catalysts for reflection. And in remembering them, we honor not just the lions they were, but the wild lions we must never lose. His roar has faded, but his legacy lives on. If you'd like to keep these stories alive and support the channel, click Super Thanks below this video. Every contribution, whether $5, $20 or even $100, helps us bring these forgotten giants and the countless wars of the savannah to life with greater power. Together, we can keep these legends alive.